On this episode of the Bangkok Podcast, we talk to author Ron Morris discussing his excellent book titled The Thai Book, a field guide to Thai political motivations.
But first, it's not a question of if, but when Thai food bites you back. Buddha belly, indeed.
Sit back and relax because episode 2.40 of the Bangkok Podcast is another long one. Hello and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian expat who came to Thailand on a vacation in 2001 and never left.
And I am Evo Terra, an American expat living full-time in Bangkok since the beginning of 2016. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the Big Mango.
So before we start talking politics, Evo, do not eat the crab, man.
I heard you might have ingested a crab with a bad attitude that took you out of commission for a bit.
I don't know. I think H.R. Giger raised my crab from a baby. H.R. Giger was the artist who designed the alien from the Alien movies, in case you don't know.
Thank God. I had no idea what you're talking about. Got it. Okay, got a xenomorph. A xenomorph. Got it. Okay.
You non-nerd. Anyway, I went out to dinner with friends at a nearby seafood restaurant that was supposed to be awesome. And I ordered this. I thought I didn't want to have a lot to eat, and I ordered this little crab curry. I thought I'd get a little bowl of crab curry. And this thing came to our table. It was the size of a damn volleyball. This pile of crab legs and shells and curried meat. It was really good, but man, something did not agree with my stomach. And I spent the next 2.5 days, well, you can fill in the rest with your imagination, but I didn't eat much, and I spent a lot of time by myself in a small room. But I'm only now just starting to feel better, and it's the second time in almost 17 years that I've ever had that bad of a reaction to street food.
So there's the good news, listener. 17 years, and he's really had 2 times that he's gotten sick. And don't blame it on street food. Don't blame it on that particular place. It just happens. But people get food poisoning.
Happens everywhere.
Some sort of bad thing all over the place. You keep hearing people complain about it happening in Thailand all the time, and I think that's a lot of bunk. Yeah, there's a lot of weird spices and stuff here. But again, you just heard him. 17 years, twice it's happened. So relax. It's good. Just watch out for that one crab place, which we will not mention on the show.
Yeah, so any crab curry you eat.
Love crab curry.
Oh, it's really good. And this was really good too. There was nothing off about it. And I don't think it was bad. It just didn't agree with me.
Was it soft shell or was it hard shell?
It was hard shell. And it was like the meat was outside of the crab. Like I didn't have to break the crab open. But the pieces of the crab came bundled with it.
Right. Yeah, they like included. To show you what it came with. It's like ordering boneless chicken, but instead of they would put the bones on the side. Which no one would do that. But for some reason, crab, when you order it that way in Thailand, they want to say, see, we actually took it out of the shell.
Can you imagine that if you got like some chicken and then a pile of bones next to it? Like, what kind of voodoo crap is this?
You order a hamburger and it comes out with a leg bone.
Yeah, so stay away from crab, man. Stick to safe food like lab moo and insects.
Yeah, because nothing can go wrong with pork. No doubt about that.
So let me tell you about this great book I read, Devo.
Tell me about this great book you read, Greg.
This book, I bought it on my Kindle for like $6 on Amazon, and it's called The Thai Book, a field guide to Thai political motivations, written by a dude named Ron Morris. Now, I met Ron about 14 years ago, and we shared a beer in Soy Convent and had a very nice conversation, but this was far before he wrote the book. At the time, and still actually today, Ron is very well known for his website, 2bangkok.com. That's the numeral 2, Bangkok.com. If you haven't visited the site, it's well worth looking into if you are interested in Thailand, because what it does is really unique. It takes things like political cartoons and editorials from the Thai language press, and it breaks them down into, like, explains what's going on for English audiences, which is not an easy thing to do. Like you see those political cartoons and someone is, a cat and the other person is like a ball of yarn, and okay, you really need to understand the context of that for it to make any sense at all. And that's what Ron does with these cartoons and things like that, is he explains why this guy is a cat and why this guy is a ball of yarn and what that means. So it's really interesting in finding out a little bit of the subtext of what's going on in the Thai political scene. So what Ron did was he took all that knowledge that he's picked up over the years from this stuff, and he put it into a book, which came out in 2013. And I got to say, I read the book on my Kindle, and I've never highlighted as many passages as I did in this book. It's got great, concise explanations of how Thai politics work and how it dovetails with Thai culture and the Thai way of thinking. And so I thought we would invite him on the show to have a conversation. And that's where you talked to him, didn't you?
That's correct. I had a conversation with Ron, and that's what we're going to get into in just a moment.
So rather than us tell you Ron's story and what the book is about, let's just let Ron do it for us.
I'm a political commentator. I'm a political consultant as well. I have some people I consult for who want to know what's going on in Thailand and what it all means. That's where the book grew out of, creating those basic understandings of the Thai system so anyone could understand what's going on. I meant it to be a field guide to Thai political motivations because so many of the aspects of what goes on here, they're maybe opposite, or we assume one thing means one thing, but it actually doesn't. It has a different meaning in this culture.
And that was what was key to me, Greg, figuring out what's different about Thailand, not only from the Western world where I and you came from, but the rest of Southeast Asia.
It's such an interesting culture to know, even if you only look at the surface. But once you start digging, much like Bangkok itself, like the city can act as a metaphor for the whole damn country. The more you dig, the more there is to explore. And it's not always immediately clear what makes sense and what doesn't and how pieces fit together. But that's what makes it so interesting to study.
Yeah. And I don't know, listener, you might have noticed from the accent there, Ron is not Thai. However, his pro credentials aside, which you've already heard about, he's actually called Bangkok home for the better part of 27 years. Now, since I was curious what Bangkok was like in 1990, well, I asked him.
Of course, it was like nothing I ever imagined. You know, the number of motorcycles on the road, the truly epic traffic jams at that time, which the traffic's 1,000 times better now than it ever was. I know some people will find that hard to believe, but imagine no SkyTrain, no subway, and just a very small piece of expressway right in the center of the city, and the rest was just gridlock all the time, and it flooded all the time as well.
The good old days. Did you know that actually back then they used to sell a thing? It was called Easy Pee, and it was actually a little urinal that people carried in their cars for men or women.
So I did hear you correctly. Okay.
Yeah, because people were stuck in traffic for so long that this thing was a necessity.
No, I did not know something like that existed on the marketplace, but now I wonder why I didn't come up with it.
Punks like you on motorcycles, you didn't need that, but people like me in cars, lifesaver.
I peed on my leg. No, wait. Back on topic.
Now, fair warning, we're going to get political here, but we've taken pretty great pains to ensure that we're not jingoistic, we're not disrespectful, and we keep the conversation at a high enough level that you don't need, dear listener, to be well versed in Thai history or current events to enjoy the show. And Ron very smartly takes the same approach.
When we look at the way Thais do things, I think all of us, if we're not part of the system, tend to be a little bit patronizing to them and think that they should sort of change to our system. And the way I've always looked at it is I'm just trying to see if I can define how things are without really judging it too much. And of course, that's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, he's totally correct. And I'm very guilty of it myself. And the first instinct for me anyway is when you see something not working the way you expect it to do is automatically think, why don't they just do it like this, the way I'm used to doing it, because it works well in my home. And it is really difficult to not think that and to just sort of sit back and not only be patient, but try to understand why whatever is working that way is working that way.
Yeah, exactly. As you say, it's tough not to do that, especially for me, because I'm kind of a jerk. But anyhow, certainly trying not to be. But let's get to the meat of the show. Let's jump into the politics. Now, one thing I know about Thai politics is that it is really, really complicated. You can just show up in America and someone says, this is the left, this is the right, and here's where they agree and disagree. you're done. In 5 minutes, you can easily explain American politics, at least on the surface level. Is that possible in Thailand?
Well, you can understand it in 5 minutes if you have that cultural foundation, but a person with another cultural foundation might not understand political parties and protest and fairness in the same way at all. I usually start from an idea like protest when I talk about how Thailand is different, where in the West, or maybe an international way, protest is an admirable tool of freedom of expression. It's something that might be employed here or there. It's a good thing, and all sides should support it. But in Thailand, protest is seen as a shameful last resort. It only happens as a last resort, as do strikes. So if you see a strike in Thailand, that means people are about to go crazy. It's not just a way for people to express their grievances. The protest here expresses a shameful rift in society, and people might look at it as something that would want to be avoided at all costs. And the people who are protesting are expected to be very upset and acting out because they have been pushed too far by the system. So people would look at that as a negative thing, not as a positive tool of free speech. This is the last straw. They've been pushed too far. And in this context, you can understand how some of the oftentimes radical or violent speech you hear at protest, that's expected because these people are saying, again, this is it, and we have to be assuaged in some way, and they want the world to know that there is a breakdown in unity, and unity is one of the highest goals of the Thai world, as opposed to maybe in the West where we say it's important to be able to say whatever you want and let the chips fall where they may. Well, in Thailand, that's not a goal at all, because people always moderate their speech to make sure that they do not give offense to one person or another.
So hold your thoughts on unity for a moment, but I want to go back to protesting and what he talked about, Greg. What are your thoughts on protesting, not just in Thailand, but from a Canadian point of view?
Well, let's be honest, I'm not smart enough to really understand protest in a Thai perspective like Ron does, but from my perspective in Canada, protesting is something, if you organize a well thought out, well spoken, contextual protest against something, I think that's something to be admired. You even see high school kids organizing protests. And if they're organized and they present a legitimate list of grievances, like that's something to be admired. You're like, wow, these guys are motivated, they're intelligent, and they can communicate with each other on the level that adults can, So yeah, for us in Western countries, protest is a cornerstone of democracy, and it's a right that every single person has.
Yeah. But what Ron is saying here, it's more like it's the last straw of their political system. So it's definitely a different way of looking at things. But he was talking about unity. So let's get back to unity and see where that conversation takes us with Ron. The concept of unity is an interesting one from a Western perspective again, in that, well, look on all America's money. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. We think that we are unified in our approach, but it means something markedly different in Thailand.
There are certain reasons, I don't know, and I have not studied the reasons why Thai society would want to moderate the speech in which they do. But as you can see, if you're working in a Thai office somewhere, when you meet a person or when a Thai person meets you, they want to gauge first where you are on the ladder. Are you above them? Are you below them? Are you equal? And once they know that, then they're comfortable in interacting with you and speaking with you in a certain way, understanding where your station is. Where, Westerners find that very unusual, and Westerners can be very off-putting to Thais because, we feel like, the maid, the CEO, we're all ought to be equal. We all want to be equal. We all want to treat each other in the same way. That's just definitely not the case in everyday Thai interaction.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the first things you learn as a foreigner here is how to Y properly. And the Y is when you bring both of your hands together in front of your face as a greeting. Now, there's a really subtle art to Ying. The basics of it is the higher the status of the person you're Ying to, the higher your hands go. So if I was Ying you, Evo, my hands would cup my feet. No, just kidding.
Wow.
My hands would just be directly in front of my nose, which is sort of a Y to equals, to peers, to say, hey, how you doing? Welcome. Nice to see you. But if I was Ying my boss, or maybe a police officer or a doctor or someone like that, my hands would probably go a little bit higher, and my thumbnails might even touch the middle of my forehead, kind of thing. So, and of course, there's all these other rules about, do children Y adults? Do adults Y waiters? Do servants Y their bosses? All these kind of little subtle rules that are very interesting indicators of how stratified Thai culture is. And that's, I think, part of what Ron was talking about.
Yeah, that's true. And that's another difficult concept for those of us that were not raised in this culture to understand, is that idea about status permeates everything. Again, I'm an American, and so I'm raised on the idea that, well, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Not so much here. You are equal at the station. You're equal with some people, but certainly not with everyone. And that's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. It's welcome to Thailand, and the quicker I can learn to understand that, the better. Now, speaking of that what I just talked about was approaching things from a Western point of view, and that's the wrong idea. And if you are doing it from a Western point of view, you probably still think that fairness sounds rather unfair, which honestly, I think so as well. But of course, that all depends on how one defines the concept of fairness. Can you expand on that idea of fairness in politics for just a bit?
I think we can see the idea of fairness and the idea of sympathy for people who are unfairly treated. When you have certain cases where it appears to the public that too much of the public legal resource is tuned on one person, or there's too much pressure being put on one politician or one big man, no matter the actual right or wrong of it, there begins to develop in the public a sympathy for that person who has the pressure put on them, because there's an expectation that everybody, no matter the right or the wrong of what they do, can expect not to be unduly pressured by the system. That is the idea of unfairness. This comes up a lot in politics, a lot in editorial cartoons, where this idea for sympathy for the person who is being sort of attacked or pressured, despite whether they're a good guy, a bad guy, a villain, there still can be sympathy for them by the treatment that they have received. It's a kind of a strange thing to contemplate. It's fairness without regard for the right or the wrong of what the person did. But again, this has to do with unity, that if you unduly pressure people, it will cause them to react and upset the peace of the metaphorical village, which is the nation. And that unity is the most important thing of all to maintain in Thai society. That's why people moderate their speech and very carefully decide, is this going to upset the unity? Is this going to cause people to react in a certain way?
So there's unity. Once again, there's a definite twist on the concepts of right and wrong. There's a lot wrapped up in this idea. And again, a lot of it doesn't make sense because we try and view it from a Western perspective. It's
complicated, and I certainly don't understand it. One of the things that I sometimes complain about is that if, for me personally, like if I upset the wrong person in Thailand, that's pretty much it for me in Thailand.
Can be.
And I think for anyone, like even if you're a Thai person, if you upset or make an enemy of a person who's on a higher societal level than you, you're going to have big problems. Yeah. But that's one of the comforts of being back in our home country, is that anyone, give or take, is equal in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of society. There might be some discrepancies here and there. And of course, this guy can afford a better lawyer than you or whatever. But roughly speaking, person A is equivalent to person B, C, D, or E.
Yeah, right.
So you might not care about unity. You might care what's fair.
Yeah.
And that's something that's, clearly not thought of as deeply as we're used to it.
To take that one step further, as you mentioned, if you upset the wrong person in Thailand, your time in Thailand is over. It's not just a you versus that one person. It's when you upset that person, you upset everybody else. That's the problem. You've not just upset the person, you've upset the unity. You've upset the overall concept of what it means to be part of this, as he mentioned, the village, which is the entire nation. So it's not just a you versus somebody else. It's you versus everyone. They'll pile back on you and say, you're screwing this thing up, which is really tough to get.
And add on top of that, if you're doing it and you're a foreigner, then there's a whole other level of who's this jerk coming in, like how dare you wade into our peaceful little village here and start messing things up with your stupid ideas.
Right.
So yeah, it can be a tough nut to crack.
Now you heard Ron in that last clip say the words big man, which you might want to translate to big person as I'm about to do. So I asked him to better define what he means by a big man. Can you talk about the idea of big person? Because I think we need to expand on what you mean.
If you're a person of a certain level, you become a big man, and everything in the society that we've talked about creates a dynamic where that person is getting a lot of praise and is very insulated from any criticism. And over time, this creates a certain arrogance that very often leads to them going too far in their actions. And time and time again, when you look at the people who get in power in politics or the military, the danger, their pitfall is going too far and not understanding the public reaction or the consequences of their action. And very often, I think even for Thais, they would recognize this as, this is what happens when you're a big man. It takes a very wise person to be able to cut through all of that deference that a person at that level receives and accept some counsel from people. And I suppose in some ways this would be true of even American society. Because of all these underlying factors that we're talking about, it is particularly acute in Thai society. And it's a goal and a desire from every person and every person in their family to be the person everybody wise to, and they have their own little fiefdom that circulates around them, and they're the big man that everyone defers to. And I'm sure that's a very seductive way to live, but it results in missteps of action at all levels.
Is it a foregone conclusion in Thai society that these big men will ultimately make those missteps? Much like in American politics or Western politics, we have the concept of absolute power corrupts absolutely, and it will happen, and we're kind of jaded to that effect. Same happened here in Thailand?
Well, in terms of my opinion of it, and when I forecast and look at things, I usually assume that is what will happen, that eventuality will always occur. And it probably could be said that the present regime in Thailand has not succumbed to that so far, surprisingly, because the military is often very susceptible to that big man syndrome. The present one has been, I think, more successful in going after their goals and not having a giant misstep. But I think that is the greatest danger. They have all the power, and it's theirs to slip up with.
You wrote the book prior to the most recent coup.
Yes.
Any modifications you would make on things post-coup that were not in place that you saw back in the early teens when you wrote the book?
My only thing would have been I would have expected that this clique of military men would have gone too far and fouled up, just like the guys who took over in 2006 and the people who took over in 1990. But this group of generals is a lot more savvy. And if you oppose military rule, that might be a little scary because they've been a lot more clever and a lot more sort of extreme in doing what they want to do. And they haven't seemed to be obviously flailing around. They didn't cause the stock market to almost crash like it did with the coup government in, I believe, 2006. And they've pushed through a lot of things in the Constitution that I don't think anybody would have ever dreamt they could have done, even when the coup was underway. I mean, this is a tough, restrictive constitution that's going to make it very difficult for Thaksin and his family's political parties to do what they had tried to do in the past. And that's, I think we see, it's already changing the political landscape. And there's all these factions that, the Phua Thai, who's going to be the leader? There really isn't a Shinawat family member who seems capable of taking that over. So it probably means the party's going to maybe drift away from some of the control of the family. What's happening backstage now is that the government is sort of negotiating and trying to figure out how it can cobble together some sort of government that leaves them enough control that they're not going to have another government come to power and try a wholesale rewrite of the Constitution again.
That's really interesting. And actually, this is a one sort of bit that I could probably see the greatest parallels with the cultures that I'm familiar with, and specifically with American politics right now, which is sort of dominating all of the news cycles.
Yeah, sorry.
I can kind of see it. I can kind of see the parallels here, because for me, it sort of seems like the Republicans who are in charge now are really smart. And the Democrats, the opposing party, are kind of flailing around. And I don't think anyone really knows what they're doing. They're just trying to get as much of the pie as they can while they can. So I think the concept of a big man, in this case, the leader of the Republican Party, or these very rich businessmen, or the lobbyists that do all this work, I think that's a pretty easy concept to bridge between the two cultures. They're not exactly the same, but there's certainly the big man thing in Western culture.
Yeah, no doubt. We certainly have them. I just think it's a different style of processes here, very much mafia like, if you really want to come down to it, which gets interesting.
So even in Thai language, they have the phrase for big man is puyai, and everyone understands the context of what that means. Whereas in English, if you said big man, you're like, okay, yeah, he's rich or powerful, but it wouldn't convey the sort of social nuance and the deference and things like that puyai does to a Thai person. So it's the same concept, but it's a lot deeper here, I think.
So in our efforts thus far to understand Thai politics, we've covered the concepts of both unity and fairness looked at through the Thai lens, not the American or the Canadian or UK or wherever you're from. Think unity and fairness through the Thai lens. But there's one more thing we need to talk about, and that's called saving face. The concept of saving face is prevalent throughout Thailand, and perhaps no more so than in politics. And it relates back to the concept of unity and fairness, because you don't want to embarrass anyone. You want to preserve face for yourself, obviously, but you also want to make sure that you're not causing offense to others and causing others to lose face, which is vastly different than in America, where it's all about pointing out the embarrassing foibles of our politicians, and not just American politics, but kind of uniformly Western politics.
Well, first I would say that in Thai politics at the highest level, there isn't saving face between politicians. There are big open attacks, which are considered sort of an act of war. And there are certain politicians that are brought forward to carry out these attacks. And the boldness or the shocking nature of these attacks have been part of the nature of politics in about the last 20 years, since the political disruptions that we've had with Thaksin and his parties coming to power again and again. And also with that, there's also usually foul language. This is a perennial thing saying that we wouldn't want our children to listen to Parliament because of the nasty, dirty, over-the-top language that some of these guys use towards each other. So on that level, Thai politics is very freewheeling.
That reminds me of an old saying that I heard a long time ago, and it deals with American politics, of course, but it says, "Don't tell my mother I'm in politics. She thinks I play piano in a whorehouse."
I'm looking forward to getting into Thai politics now. Not only can I embarrass someone, I can call him a dick.
Yeah, right. Good luck with that. Let me know how that goes from the prison cell.
All right, so let's circle back. I wanted to understand what sort of checks and balances exist in Thai politics, like executive branch, legislative branch, judicial, military. How does it all connect together?
I think, all of that goes back to the way that Thai political parties are not based on ideology, but around personalities instead. So, that you start out with these local business groupings, maybe in the provinces, people who are have various interests there, local tycoons, maybe you would call semi-mafia sort of people. And these groups will want to have a person who's an MP when they get big enough to sort of protect their interests, to continue to be the big men and the big groupings that they are, and bring business and profits back to themselves and maybe their province. And they just naturally group themselves around other powerful men whose main quality is the ability to get that political clique into a political party that then becomes part of government. And the most famous guys, Nguyen and Ban Han, those were guys who had a lot of MPs that joined under them because they had the ability to put themselves in a sitting government. And that sitting government, the ministers of parliament, they're the ones who control the purse strings and the budget, and thus they have the real power. And in practical terms, they're offset by many other factors, some electoral, some unelected, and that includes the military, sort of the bureaucracy as a whole. There can be academics that can speak out against the government that seems to be getting too powerful. Even the police force, all of these different groupings are they have their own power, and they're always acting to make sure that another part of power in the system does not gain too much power, and start to act in unison when that happens. And you see that phenomenon several times happening in the past when a political party or a government is at least perceived to perhaps gaining control over military transfers or something like that. So this is how these groupings are sort of finely balanced. And then, of course, I've mentioned, the judiciary, which traditionally didn't have a big role, but in the past 10 or so years, they've had a much greater role in sort of the banning of the political parties. It's still the situation that, if you're on the side of the banning, you're going to say that it's not a good decision and it's done for political purposes. And if you agree with the banning, you're going to agree with the decision.
So no parties. We had the concept of big men once again, and this crazy notion that it's what my grandmother said: "Don't get too big for your britches, boy." I mean, that's what I heard him say.
Yeah. It seems similar to what, especially lately in the past few years, what Western politics is sort of ground down into this knockdown, no holds barred brawl. And it's kind of getting a bit dirty, but
I think the difference is that's Western style is publicized everywhere. But in Thailand, if I'm understanding wrong correctly here, you really only see that if you're a student of the politics or you are inside of it, because the rest of it is all about unity and fairness, and let's paint a good picture for the world.
Yeah, I guess so. It seems a lot more mathematics involved. It's like a lot finer balance. You're dealing with different cliques and things like that, like you said, and you've got to appease this guy, appease that guy, and appease that guy. like I said, I think it's getting more like that in especially American politics and Western politics these days. But it seems like it's been like that for a long time in Thailand. And I'm no politician, so maybe it's always been like that everywhere. I don't know.
Right. And stop bagging on American politics. No, I'm kidding. Feel free. We have totally earned it. So listen, as our conversation was winding down, I did ask Ron a question off the record because I thought it might be a little contentious because let's face it, there are some things you just don't talk about in Thailand. But actually, when we got into it, Ron said, no, this actually is fine. Please turn the recorder back on. So I did. And I asked him a simple question, which I didn't get. So I'm going to have to relate that to you. It was this. So the changes we've seen in the last few years, especially just in the last few months, to the political dynamics of Thailand have never before been witnessed by any other living person in Thailand. That's how drastic these changes have been recently. And so my question was simple. Are Thai politics at a turning point? Is this the new order?
Ooh, good question.
Well, that is a very astute question for someone who says they don't know a lot about the Thai situation, because it's exactly the issue that I'm mulling over in my mind all the time to me. And, you got to be brave to make these predictions, or you're just a blogger. An analyst has to say what's going to happen. And it feels like to me that Thaksin and his politics was a sort of a singular irritant in Thai politics. And if that influence and the ability to control the parties and that whole movement, if that is sidelined, there is really no other person who's like him, that has the money, the ambition, the drive for political power and dominance that he had. And so it does seem like with the new constitution and the way the political parties and the factions in the political parties are acting, that there may be a sense across the board that his ability to pull strings in the future, or anyone to pull strings on his behalf, is going to be diminished. So the sort of political big question of the last 15 or 20 years is Thaksin good or bad for the country? And, his involvement is always going to be overwhelming. How are you for that? Are you against that? What's the good and what's the bad of it? But that feeling is only just a very small slice of Thai history. The last 15 or 20 years, we could say that's the dominant thread. But if Thaksin is sidelined, we're probably going to be returning to the real dominant thread of the wider view of Thai history, which is, what is the military's role in government and politics? That has been the big question over many decades. And I think we already see politics on all sides, pro and against Thaksin, already returning to that question as the political reality looks like it's going to return to where the military fits into politics. And, one of the reasons why Thaksin might be sidelined at this point is that, Thaksin did not gain his big political majority from just organic support from people. The political party, the Thai Rock Thai Party, that first party that he led, that he controlled, it gained its majority of MPs by essentially buying up all other parties and absorbing them into the party body, and that's where that big majority came from. And those cliques still exist that were brought into the party. So what's happening right now in the background is that some of those might join other parties. We've already seen some announcements, and any further sign of that sort of movement and reshifting of political factions would signal a sense of the MPs in the political world that there's going to be a new reality. So, and I'd finally want to say that what I just said, all of that, a lot of people thought that was going to be the case in 2006 after the first coup. And they also thought that was going to be the case a few years later when the People Power Party was dissolved and there was that march to the airport. People have thought that Thaksin and his party and his movements have been finished over and over again. But he's shown amazing tenacity and keeping the party together and retaining a rural popularity. So who knows? Maybe I'm wrong, but certainly there's going to be a new political reality in the future.
Yeah, man. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? It's just the cycles and cycles and cycles. What's old is new again.
Yeah, that is true. So obviously, that long conversation with Ron has filled my head with lots of things for me to think about as I understand my position here in Thailand. But I couldn't stop thinking about the average Joe, or I guess the average Samchai here in Thailand, and how he or she thinks about the larger picture of not just politics of their own, but international politics. We've just heard a Canadian spouting off about American politics like he has any idea of what's going on, and actually Canadians know more about American politics than Americans do. But what about Thais? What do they think about international politics? What are their views on the larger world out there? And here's what Ron had to say.
This is a very insular world. It's just Thailand is the world, and then there's other things outside that are secondary. I would say that the outside is just something that is unusual, interesting, admirable, but the real world is right here, and it's within Thailand. I mean, Thailand is not like the U.S. or the U.S. has its fingers in many pies around the world and seeks to be the world's policeman and has had that role, and the American populace accepts that that's the case and that the military will be deployed here and there and everywhere else. Thailand is a very inward-looking world, and it is not a country that dabbles or has dabbled for a long time in the politics of other nations surrounding it. And that was all the way back into their history of the way they so deftly pushed back against the colonial pressures that threatened to engulf them at any moment, always kind of acceding a little bit to the biggest power. So I think that the outside world is just an unusual, interesting, but ultimately kind of nonsense place in terms of the Thai psyche. And I just want to add, as I'm saying this, I mean, who am I to comment on some other culture or talk about how people speak and think about things. And clearly, a lot of these things are very much generalizations. But one of the characteristics of Thai people is they're not very comfortable or able to explain how their ways are different than other nations. And that even makes them more insular and more unwilling to have their ways put under the microscope and judged by countries that so clearly different. And, Thais will usually leave it at saying, no one can understand Thailand. Can't understand Thailand. So some of these things that we talk about, if we start to understand them, we will understand the underlying political impulses, even though, again, there are generalizations in all of these. A country this big and this vast, there will be lots of people with lots of different opinions, but I'm just talking about the generalization that we can understand the culture in a I think a true way, an accurate way.
Ugh, you don't understand Thailand, the bane of my existence. It's funny. It got me while that was happening. I looked up an old blog post that I wrote many years ago, and it was actually a book that I found in the Siam Society and it was a letter that a French missionary wrote in 1829 back to his compatriots in France. And there's several really interesting observations he made on Thailand, but one of them I thought would be funny is how Thais described foreigners at the time. And I'm not sure it's entirely different these days. And this is what he said. He said, Thais describe foreigners thusly. They are exceedingly tall, hairy, and evil-smelling. They school their children long and devote their lives to amassing wealth. Their women, though large and round, are beautiful. They do not grow rice.
Well, there you go. Thailand in a nutshell. And yeah, I don't know that that's all that different from today. Well, again, thanks very much to Ron for coming on and spreading his knowledge with us. I don't know about you, Greg, but all joking aside, after chatting with Ron, I actually do feel some of this stuff makes better sense to me now because I'm shifting my perspective. I'm not trying to make everything fit into my nice Americanized hole, which you don't take that the wrong way. But I think it makes for a slightly better understanding, and I'll probably return to these conversations again and again, and so that I continue to make sure I have the best possible time here in the kingdom.
Yeah, and I got to say again, I'm not being paid to say this. Ron's not advertising with us or anything, but I really can't recommend this book enough. Even after being here 17 years, and I am no political scientist, but I feel like I understand Thailand fairly well. But even after all that time, I still found the book really educational, and it made me stop and think many, many times, and it really gave me another level of appreciation of Thailand. And I always come back to what my good buddy Scott said one time when he was giving a presentation about his time in Thailand. And he said, it's a much more enjoyable place if you realize that you're not supposed to change Thailand. You're supposed to let Thailand change you. Wise
words indeed. Speaking of wisdom, it's time for that part of the show where we impart wisdom on to you. It's called Love, Loathe, or Leave, and where one of us, this time it's Greg, will spring a little something special about living here in the kingdom on the other one, me, and find out if that thing is something that we love about Thailand, something we loathe about Thailand, or we hate it so much that it's actually going to make us leave one of these days. All yours, Mr. Greg.
Well, I have slightly a bit of a different format this time. I don't want it to be something that is just hard love, loathe, or leave, but I wanted to compare certain things. And we talked about this in the beginning of the show, which, dear listener, you can hear if you become a patron because it was in the bonus content for Patreon supporters of the Bangkok Podcast. But what do you think? Now, Evo, you're on a motorcycle. I have a car, but I take the train to work. And there was an epic rainstorm tonight. Now, what would you rather do? Would you rather deal with the crowds and the splashes and the delays of the BTS and the subway? Or would you rather rely on a car or a motorcycle to get around and have your own independence to go wherever you want, potentially being stuck in traffic for hours and hours?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, especially when you bring in the factor of rain. So I'll try and keep it in that instance.
Yeah.
So a car is always the last place I want to be in Thailand, or in Bangkok specifically. Doesn't matter if it's raining or shining. I guess at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's not bad. But any other time, a car is just flat out worthless, in my opinion. I know you've got one and you need it for certain things, but if you have your option, a car is the worst. So that goes on the very bottom. So then it becomes the difference between, do I want to take the BTS? Because at least in the BTS itself, I'm free of rain. I'm not going to get wet. But I'm also going to be fighting lots of other people who are also trying not to get wet. Although everybody is kind of wet. You got dripping umbrellas and other challenges.
Yeah. They got splashes from waiting for the trains and stuff. So you're damp. Everyone is damp.
And you have to get to the SkyTrain. I mean, it's not like we live at the SkyTrain. We have to go 500 meters from where we live to get to the SkyTrain, and that's rain nonstop. Where on a motorbike, you're on a motorbike. And mine doesn't have a convertible top. It's one of those kinds of motorbikes where there is no cover on top, which means a motorbike, not a car. So... but I have a raincoat like everybody else in Thailand. You get the parka and you deal with that. It definitely sucks on a motorbike because traffic slows down itself and you get splashed by cars and you can't cover everything. You're going to get wet. You're going to get moist. I don't know. We had to go out to dinner the last on the 4th with a bunch of other Americans, and it was raining outside and it sucked in traffic, and it took me 30 minutes where it would have taken me 15 on the BTS. So I don't know. Just that freedom of being on a motorbike, though, and not being stuck, not have to worry about anything. And I think I'm going to go motorbike as still my primary mode of transportation.
All right. I'm going to stick with BTS because I think you put in your headphones, you got something to listen to, you got some podcasts lined up, maybe the Bangkok Podcast, you're good to go. And I don't mind. I would much rather be dry and comfortable and have a relatively good idea of when I'm going to get home, even if it's a delay, than I would sitting in a car under my own control and maybe having to wait half an hour, 2 hours, 3, 4 hours, which is sometimes the case in a bad rainstorm in Bangkok. I would much rather rely on the BTS, even if I am damp when I get home and it maybe takes a while and I have to deal with crowds and everything like that. But yeah, I'm a BTS guy all the way for the rainy season.
For the listener out there who happens to live in Krung Thep along with us, what do you think? Chime in. Tell us what your preferred mode of transportation when it's raining outside. And I guess you could cop out and say, don't leave the house. That's fine. If you want to do that, you can do that. But if you
It must be nice to be independently wealthy and not have to go to work.
Yeah, duh. What a great idea.
Wait, you stay home all day?
Yeah, it's true. I do. Sorry. Hey, before we go, I want to shout out a big thanks. We talked to them a little bit. We'll do it one more time to our patrons. We crossed a big milestone today, Greg. It's not a huge milestone, but hey, baby steps. And I simply couldn't be happier. Well, wait a minute. Yeah, I could be happier if more people signed up to become our patron, which they certainly should do.
Yeah, we're starting to put up some pretty cool bonus content like longer shows and conversations that take place before and after the show where we can sort of, I guess, we can have a bit more fun with how we talk. There's cool swag available and, of course, a massive thank you to those who have already become a patron of the Bangkok Podcast.
Patreon.com/Bangkok Podcast, and you can become our best friend too.
Well, everyone, thanks for listening to another extra long episode of the Bangkok Podcast. If you have anything you'd like to share or a topic you'd like to hear us talk about on a future show, please leave a comment on bangkokpodcast.com, or you can reach out directly to me on Twitter, where I am BKK Greg.
Or you can send us a message on either Facebook or on Twitter at Bangkok Podcast. Oh, don't forget the Line account is still there and growing. If you want to listen in like a true Thai person, well, then you should be doing so online. There's a link to sign up in our show notes for this particular episode. For Greg Jorgensen, I am Evo Terra. We will be back next week with more stories of our lives lived in Krung Thep Mahanakhon right here on the Bangkok Podcast. Cheers.
I'm sorry, is this me?
Yeah, that is you.
Okay. Wait, what?
I wrote the soft opener for you.
This doesn't make sense. Before we start, don't eat the crab man? And then goes into me again?
No. Then I talk after that.
Okay.
You just
All right, here we go.
because